Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and joining me in studio, Washington director for MoveOn.org, and my friend Ben Wikler.
Great to be here, Alex.
So I was saying in the break while we were talking, watching your social media is actually just, it's making me tired because there are so many things happening. I emailed Tom. I was like, hey, good thing you picked a slow news week for me to be guest hosting. But it's literally, it's just like one after another thing. And, right now I had John Nichols on earlier. We were talking about Comey, and I've seen all of the work that you're doing. I just want to say one thing. Move on and your allies. But it's like, I saw you put the word out to call that action. I mean, it was like when the firing happened, right? I mean, it was nighttime.
Yeah, it was like probably 2-3 hours after the firing.
And so what, like 12 hours later?
Yeah, I think we had about 15 hours from the time MoveOn sent the email saying, we need to rally outside the White House tomorrow to demand investigation of Trump now that Comey's been fired. And then, a day less than 24 hours, a lot less than 24 hours later, we're outside with about 500 people outside the White House, chairman of the Democratic Party, leaders of a whole range of different groups, and a huge crowd of people just chanting shame, shame, shame loud enough that actually we could be heard in the White House briefing room. We were hearing from reporters who were inside that they could hear the crowd chanting outside, which is very satisfying.
Was Spicer still hiding in the bushes at that point, or had he?
No, he only hides in the bushes in darkness.
In darkness,
yeah.
No, this is it's right. It's only in darkness that he hides.
Democracy dies in the bushes. That was a tweet I saw someone do. I love it.
But seriously, that action was really powerful, and I think it shows kind of the heat and the outrage that people have over this. Just tell us about that. What is the ask? What do you think people can do right now?
Yeah.
As the resistance, I feel, is even more engaged right now and it's been engaged, but now it's like kicking it up even another level.
We're like on turbo mode right now. So that happened in D.C. yesterday, and that happened at noon. It's worth noting, 500 people showed up at noon on a workday with a few hours notice. Well, most people only heard about it when MoveOn texted. We didn't want to text our list at 11 p.m. the night before, so we texted our members in D.C. at like 8:30 a.m. on Wednesday morning, and boom, they were there 3 hours later. Across the country, we also anchored dozens of protests outside of Senate offices that happened in, cities and towns all across the country last night. And the key thing about that is that our big leverage is not just public opinion directed at the White House. It's that senators could force something to happen. Mm-hmm. And that to me is like the central strategy here. So there's sort of two different ways that it could go down. The thing that people had been sort of focused on and calling for that you hear more publicly is the thing that the Congress should obviously do, which is set up a bipartisan select committee that can investigate this outside of the intelligence committees. The reason why that won't happen is that McConnell and Ryan do not want to do anything that could impede their ability to hand out giant tax cuts to the rich. But if you had 3 Republican senators side with Democrats, they could block every Trump nominee from being confirmed. They could block even reconciliation bills on votes on bills, and basically hold up the entire Trump agenda until there's a special prosecutor named by the Deputy Attorney General. And that is the central thing. There are now several Republicans that have expressed their concerns, that have said that they want a special prosecutor. If we can actually get them to put their action where their mouth is and join a solid block of Democrats, they could basically, hold all progress hostage until, in the best possible sense of that phrase, until a special prosecutor is appointed. And that's where we need to go. So pressure on the Senate is actually the big lever that constituents, citizens have right now to force some truth about the, what's happening with the Russia-Trump collusion.
And it's really the investigation, right? That we need to know that the investigation into the facts, which we don't have, but that the investigation is not tainted by political pressure. It has to be independent.
That's absolutely right. And it goes, so there's two things. There's that, and also it goes beyond that. So first, on the that level, the FBI is the entity that has resources to do the investigation. So even like the Senate investigation is relying on the FBI to provide them with all the intelligence and information. So if the FBI is basically hostage to the political fortune of Donald Trump, if agents feel like their jobs are on the line, if they're reporting to a Donald Trump crony who's just doing his bidding, then there's no other investigation that can succeed. That's why it's critically important. You have to have somebody who's appointed within the DOJ, who's insulated from political pressure, who can direct resources, command agents, actually make stuff happen. So that has to happen.
Because how could an agent in the FBI right now actually not feel that their career is at risk if they just watched their boss get fired?
Absolutely. That's the thing. So that's the second level of this, is that not only do we have to get to the bottom of what happened with Trump and Russia, but also every other possible way that the Trump administration could be held accountable is at risk if we don't get a special prosecutor here. Because if you can just get away scot-free with firing the person who's investigating you, then anyone who's noticing corruption over here, or who's noticing abuse of power with the IRS, going after political enemies over here, or anything that the Trump administration does, will be off limits for investigation if this most high-profile abrogation of the role of the Department of Justice goes unpunished. So that's why not only is the giant Trump-Russia issue at stake, but basically any attempt to have the rule of law enforced and apply to this administration is at stake here. That's why it's worth shutting down the Senate over this. It's worth, breaking some furniture here because, frankly, everything is on the line.
I agree. Everything is on the line. I like your very clear call. I also think there is a case to be made that kitchen sink is okay here, too, that those same three Republicans should be on call, that the next head of the FBI cannot be a Trump crony.
Absolutely.
Has to be somebody who, in fact, I think there needs to, and I should just admit, I'm just stealing this from John Nichols. He said this just an hour ago.
Okay.
And I'm just going to.
I love John.
Yeah, and I'm like, I agree with that. And now that's what I think, which is the Democrats should already be offering names of these are acceptable heads of the FBI who we feel would be, untainted and are not cronies. And so there's that. And another thing John mentioned, and I think this is a good one, and I haven't heard it anywhere else, is a censure of Jeff Sessions for his role in this, for his, he supposedly recused himself,
but totally breaking his promise.
But now he's back in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Do you think that is, there's a lot to be said for a really clear ask, but there are a few different things that we could be moving on at the same time on this.
Yeah, I think all those things should happen too. I mean, these aren't exclusive of each other. I think one thing to me is that we shouldn't actually confirm a new FBI director until there's a special prosecutor.
Until there's a special prosecutor.
So having the right person is good, but I don't think we should move forward with that process. I think Democrats, the Democrats in the Senate have the power to do what's called withhold unanimous consent. Because every time the Senate does anything, it starts with, I ask unanimous consent that we, move to this next item on our agenda. And if one senator objects, then they actually have to go through a roll call vote and it slows things down. They do that hundreds of times a day. So Democrats should just be raising their hand and objecting to everything until we get a special prosecutor. Once we get that, let's have a good FBI director. I actually did you see Senator Mike Lee, super arch conservative, his tweet with a suggestion? He tweeted Merrick Garland would be a good new head of the FBI.
That's a great one.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Mike Lee and I don't often agree on stuff, but this,
I am seeing things like that though, that this is at the level of threat to our democracy and is being recognized around, but in both parties at some level. Not Mitch McConnell, not Paul Ryan, because they are dead set on looting the public coffers and giving it to their criminal friends on Wall Street as fast as possible. That's how I say it.
Yeah, that's a good shorthand.
But there are, I think, finding 3 Republicans on this is very, very reasonable. And because the outrage, here is one of the things that boggles my mind.
Sure.
How did Donald, because you've read all the things that they're caught off guard by this, right? How did they not know that this is exactly, how did they think that this was just going to be oh no, that's fine.
Yeah. How did the White House know?
Yeah.
So it's stunning to me, right?
It's stunning.
My general theory of this, so there's this idea of theory of mind. It's a concept that at a certain point when there may be 2 infant humans develop a theory of mind, which is the idea that there's someone else has consciousness and they can imagine themselves in someone else's shoes. So you want something even if it's not something I want, for example. So I don't think Donald Trump has theory of mind. I don't think he's able to actually project himself into the shoes of anybody else and figure out how they might react. So he was just thinking about how he reacts. How he would react. And
Which is also the lack of empathy. And when I talk about it, a lot of this makes sense if you recognize that he doesn't have a concept of public service.
Yeah.
So he's not looking at being the president of the United States. He's looking at how being the president of the United States can benefit Donald Trump.
Yes.
And in that frame, all of his actions, you're like, oh, yeah, I can see how, you know.
Right. This does help him. The stunning thing is that he only talked to this very close circle around him, and none of them warned him about this. I'm surprised that Pence couldn't figure this out. He told Pence he was going to do this. Pence didn't say this will be a total disaster. You know what I mean? And then he called Lindsey Graham, and apparently Lindsey Graham said, yeah, he's got to go. Chuck Schumer was like, this will be a mistake if you do this, Mr. President. And like, mistake is actually a great way to phrase it.
Yeah.
It's like a stupid, disastrous, terrible mistake, as well as an act of malevolence.
As a student of history, right, you actually can recognize this from all throughout history, right, where what they call strong man, who are actually weak man, trying to be the executive in the government. And so they surround themselves with people who will not challenge them, right? And we have like case after case after case in history of how that actually will take down an entire civilization.
Yeah.
And in fact, those students of history were the people who were like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have these checks and balances so that that doesn't happen. And that's why this is such a fundamental threat, is because he is challenging those checks and balances. In the last 30 seconds in this segment, what do you think?
So that's exactly right. There's just one big flaw, which is that the founders did not anticipate partisanship. And that is where Republicans are breaking the constitutional system. They're not exercising their check on the executive branch.
Yeah, they're just going along with it.
It's dangerous.
I just will read these three. These are the top 3 words in this new Quinnipiac poll. I'm going to do it all show long because I think it's interesting. When describing Donald Trump, what are it's idiot, incompetent, and liar. Those are the top 3 words in describing Donald Trump. And let's go to the phones.
Sure.
Let's go to Stanley in Montana. Stanley, you're on the line.
Hello, mate. Take you off speaker. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Stanley.
Hi, Stanley.
There's so much to talk about.
There is.
I'm going to start with about 3 things. Number 1, the corporate media has sold the American people out. If it wasn't for corporate media, Donald Trump would not be president today. He got free publicity. Bernie Sanders got 0. I'm not crying over spilt milk, but I think if Bernie Sanders got just as much media as Donald Trump, he would be our president today. He did not want to be president. And
Donald Trump did not want to be president, you're saying?
He never did. The outlandish things he said, I think he was personally trying to sabotage his own campaign. And it just didn't work, particularly when he talked about being a predator towards women. I mean, I was so surprised that he still won the election. And that's pretty much what I have to say. And other thing is, I think Trump and Pence should both be impeached. And I would like to see the worst possible scenarios, the person from Ohio who ran for president become either the vice president, because I think Pence would be a disaster. And one other thing, this cabinet scares the hell out of me.
Stanley, you had a lot there. I'm going to throw it to Ben. You can pick from the 4.
Yeah, there's a lot there that I think millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of Americans agree with. I'll just go to this point about the corporate media. There's this amazing article about Jeff Zucker, who runs CNN. And in that story, someone says, he says, I keep talking to people who say, I can't believe you have Jeffrey Lord on the air. I can't believe you have Kayleigh McEnany on the air. These Trump apologists, they're so crazy. And his response is, but you know their names. And his whole theory of the election was like, Trump is the lead character, and we're just going to have these people representing pro-Trump, anti-Trump. Everything revolves around Trump. It is good for ratings. They're like characters in a play. And that is that led to the Trump election, because everything became about Trump's personality instead of what would actually happen to regular people. That's the disaster we're in now, and you're totally right to blame the profit-seeking corporate media for it.
Yeah, Leslie Moonves, CBS, right? He might be bad for the nation, but he's great for CBS.
It may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS.
Yeah,
there you go.
Exactly.
It makes me sick.
And that is, when we get into talking about the corporate media, this is what I really... It just shouldn't surprise people, though, is the one thing, because the corporate media are the propagandist arm of the billionaire class. The interlocking boards, you can see. You can actually go to their 10Ks, and you can see exactly what they're about. And it is not the news. It is not the truth. It is money. It is only money.
It is worth pointing to right now, there's a new threat on this front, which is the Sinclair Broadcasting Corporation. They made a deal with the Trump campaign to give them unfettered access to their listeners. And now they're about to acquire dozens of additional stations, become by far the biggest private, individual owner of local television stations. This is a huge threat.
We'll be right back right after this.